بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين وحبيب رب العالمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد طب القلوب ودوائها وعافية الأبدان وشفائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها قوت الأرواح وغذائها وآله وصحبه وبارك وسلم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. الحمد لله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. It's really nice to be with all of you this morning. Alhamdulillah. Nothing like praying Fajr in the house of Allah Ta'ala and gathering with good brothers and connecting and having suhbah. And suhbah is one of the most essential parts of our religion, and to see something like this happening is really beautiful. Anywhere in the world, it's just a beautiful thing to have brothers coming together, connecting on shared vision, shared principles, shared morals, shared objectives, inshallah ta'ala. It's one of the great gifts of Allah ta'ala, having suhbah. And at a time where there's so much alienation and isolation from other men from men especially, seeing this is quite heartwarming. So God bless you all. Keep you together, inshallah. So I'd like this to be more of a discussion. I'm not really going to lecture here. I don't have. I brought my stuff, but I'm not going to open it. I have notes. Keep it organic, inshallah ta'ala. Happy to just open something and then have a conversation. So I'm a naturopathic doctor. I like the term Hakim. I like the idea of the term Hakim. I practice what I call hikmah medicine. And I'm kind of shy to say Islamic medicine, but essentially we're trying to do Islamic medicine. We're trying to revive Islamic medicine. And this whole idea of Islamic medicine is one that comes from our own traditions, comes from our own philosophical, metaphysical assumptions and worldviews. Because every discipline has assumptions, has philosophical assumptions, has ethical assumptions that are embedded in the actual framing and worldview of that ilm, of that discipline. And we were talking in the car on the way up to the masjid how Western medicine oftentimes has a philosophical assumption about the nature of the world and the nature of the human being that is antithetical to our own indigenous conception of the human being, right? So Western medicine sees the human being essentially as a body, and it sees it also as a mind. But those two realities are separate. There's no real connection between them. They have the hard problem, they call this in philosophy, the hard problem of consciousness. It's a problem for them. Why is there consciousness? Why is there sentience? Why isn't there just robots, organic, biological robots, just being wound up at birth and then just running a lifespan and then dying? And we can kind of study them and understand their movements and then even control for them. That's not how life works. And it puzzles them that there's actual sentience, there's actual life that happens. And in Islamic science, in Islamic philosophy, Islamic medicine, Islamic metaphysics, in the ulum, you have this idea that the human being is a mazj, this amalgamation of three parts, essentially. You have the human being as a ruh, the human being is a jism, the human being is the nafs. Right? These are three parts. The nafs being kind of the mental side. So you have the spirit, the mentals, and you have the physical. And these are all connected at a fundamental level. To the point even where I tell people, think of the psyche and the body as one reality on a spectrum, almost like a gradient. One is more dense, one is more subtle and latif, but it's one entity, essentially. Just to help drive the point home that there is coherence inside of you. There is unicity inside of you. There's tawheed. Allah Ta'ala is one. The creation is one. And in our metaphysics, the human being is one. as a reflection of the world, right? You have the world as the macrocosm, and you have the human being as the microcosm, the micro world. And these are not only just nice, maybe poetic things that we can say, but realities of the nature of the world. Yeah. And so part of the worldview of the Hakim, the worldview of the Muslim position, is to root themselves in that understanding so that they can have a proper practice and intervention and application of the principles of medicine with the patients. Otherwise, if you see the human being as just a collection of chemistry happening in the body, then you don't need to do much more than give a pharmaceutical drug, right? If you are just a bag of chemistry happening, then pharmaceuticals are all you have to really do to intervene in the health process. There's nothing else to do. But if that is a fundamental mistruth, if it's a misspeak, if it's a misunderstanding, then it opens up the door for so many other types of understandings and practical applications of medicine, including, there's homeopathy, there's acupuncture, there's herbalism, there's lifestyle medicine, there's osteopathic work, there's counseling work, psychological work that you can do, there's energy types of modalities that you can work with. There's a whole array of different things now. And the function then of the Hakim becomes, how do I individualize care to the individual patient, who's a unique individual, right? Unique individual. And this is ilm. This is actually fundamentally a type of ilm. Imam al-Shafi'i said about the types of knowledge. Imam al-Shafi'i, of course, the great mujtahid imam, the founder of the Shafi'i madhab. He said, al-ilmu ilman. Ilm is of two categories, two main categories of knowledge. Al-ilmu ilman. Ilmu al-adyan wa ilmu al-abdan. The ilm of deen, the religious sciences, fiqh and aqidah and Quran and hadith and usul and these types of things. And ilm al-abdan. What's ilm al-abdan? What's badan? Body. The ilm of body, which is medicine. It's tib. So he's saying the two main forms of knowledge are religious knowledge and the medical knowledges, the healing knowledges. Ilm, and ilm, of course, for us carries a lot of weight. Ilm is from Allah Ta'ala. And ilm is that which is most imperative. It's not data. It's not information, right? Ilm is that which brings us to life. Ilm is that which brings us to Sirat al-Mustaqim and keeps us on Sirat al-Mustaqim. Right? Allahu al-Alim al-Hakim. So part of what I believe as Muslims we have to be focusing on is reviving ilmul abdan, but not just in cultivating a society that pumps out physicians, Western trained physicians, because I don't think that's much of that is on ilm, but really inculcating within them an understanding of the nature of the world, the nature of creation, the nature of the human being, the purpose of the human being, the different lives of the human being, for example. And then being able to cultivate afiyah, well-being, good health, not just a maintenance of their symptoms per se, but really cultivating a type of spiritual awareness, cultivation, consciousness, a moral uprightness that matches the physical uprightness and the well-being of the body. These are very important things. The Prophet ﷺ was very concerned with people's health and well-being. And much of the sunnah, you can see that, it's food-based. And it was relationship-based. And much about spirituality and spiritual cultivation and moral uprightness. It was all this concern, it was all one. He was concerned with the thriving of the human being. Right? He wanted the human being to be well and have sa'ada and falah, not just in this life, but in the next life. So one of the frames, for example, becomes, what is health? Is health being pain-free for 60, 70 years? Is that the framework that we're using? That if the physician can keep your disease process at bay using strong pharmaceutical drugs to suppress the symptom, not heal the underlying issues, not to clear the symptom, to actually just manage the symptom. Is that the task of the Hakim? Or is it one to establish the foundation so that health and vitality truly can be attained here, and also create the conditions and the bridge by which the human being can attain afiyah for eternity? Right? It's like in our conception, you have the Hakim that can ask a question like, how do you want to live your life in 1 million years? What do you want your health status to be in 1 million years? Do you want to be in afiyah? Do you want to be in disease? Do you want to be in well-being? Do you want to be in disease? See, this is part of Islamic medicine, talking about the psychological, the emotional, the spiritual, the moral, as well as the physical, because these are all different dimensions of the human being. In Western medicine, unfortunately, even though it comes off, much of Western medicine comes from the Muslims, from the Muslim Maristans and the Dar al-Shifas, these Muslim hospitals that were spread all across the Muslim world. The Europeans didn't have any type of medicine. They would just wear necklaces of garlic and oranges to fend off evil spirits and stuff like that. They didn't really have the ilm. The Muslims had the ilm, and had the inheritance of Hippocrates and Galen and the Yellow Emperor of China, and these great, amazing Hakims. I have a belief that, Allahu Alam, this is just Mazen's belief. It's not Aqidah or anything, obviously. That the Yellow Emperor was a prophet, and many of the prophets actually were revealed the clinical indications of food and herbs of their time.
There are quite a few mentions of in Chinese medicine, the Haratao and the Yellow Emperor in particular, because they do have a lot of these beliefs that be related to the Islamic medicine, because they were the originator.
Yes.
So similar to how every prophet was given something.
Yes.
That introduced into the culture. Same thing, like Dawud alayhi salam is known for the iron to be.
Yes.
So it might have been that.
Absolutely. I mean, even Sulaiman, his son, alayhi salam, there's athar in the Isra'iliyat. Ibn Kathir has, these narrations of Sulaiman alayhi salam being, and I always like to think about Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam and Prophet Dawood, that these are prophet kings. How amazing would it have been to live in a time of a prophet king? It's an amazing thing to think about. We have Trump now, just we're shaitan, this long, big difference between the two. Latif. But there's an athar, there's a narration of Sulaiman alayhi salam praying in his garden one day, and the flowers and the herbs and the plants around him actually began to speak their clinical indications to Sulaiman alayhi salam. And the narration goes that he actually breaks the prayer, and he calls a scribe to dictate all these things, because the scribe could not hear, he could hear. So he's dictating to the scribe, write this down, write that down, this is yellow jasmine, this is whatever, this is this is that, and this is what it's for. So this is wahi. That means it's wahi. That's what that means. This is ilm. It's a form of wahi that comes down. And this is something that many of the physicians were also ulama. Like many of the iterations, maybe you've heard of Tibb al-Nabawi, books of the Tibb al-Nabawi tradition. Like you have As-Suyuti, Imam Suyuti's tradition. You have Ibn Qayyim has a Tibb al-Nabawi. You have Ibn Hajar has a Tibb al-Nabawi. There's a few of these people that were ulama and they were physicians. Imam al-Ghazali himself, he was someone who was interested in medicine and wrote many books talking about the different meanings of the physical creation. And it's actually been translated recently by Sheikh Amin Khalwadia in Chicago and Dr. Cameron Riaz. But he's talking about, how marvelous is the creation of the different types of hair, the hair on the body, and the hair on the head, and the hair on the eyelashes, and the hair of the beard, and how these all have different functions, and subhanAllah, how the eyelid, how we close it and we lubricate this, and the different types of teeth that we have, and it's just it's all about tasbih basically. It's like subhanAllah, subhanAllah. Because Imam Ghazali was interested in these types of things. Even it was said that he would go to the Muslim hospitals and the teaching clinics and stuff like that, and they'd be doing autopsies and anatomy dissections and stuff like that. And he wouldn't participate. He had a ruling on that, but he said basically, if you're gonna do it, I'll come and look. I'm not gonna cut, because he didn't believe in that. But if you're gonna open it, I'm curious to look inside. So he'd go. He studied the body. He was quite familiar with the body. And even though he's known for his spirituality, his spiritual teachings, and he's a Shafi'i faqih, he was a physician as well, And he would say later, there's a quote from him, that there's two knowledges that every seeker should have on their spiritual path to Allah Ta'ala. Fiqh and tib. Fiqh, sacred law, to know what Allah wants us to do, at what time and how to do it, to earn the pleasure of Allah Ta'ala, and tib. Why tib?
Health, vitality, facilitates the worship.
Yes, exactly. To have health and vitality and the stamina, inshallah, to do those things that Allah loves for as long as possible. Someone came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, who's the best of people? And he says, من طال عمره وحسن عمله. Who's the best of people? Ya Rasulullah. The best of people is he who has a long life filled with good deeds. That's pretty much what they're talking about, right? Fiqh and tib. That's what facilitates that.
I wanted to quickly add, like you gave that example of Prophet Sulaiman, just to connect it back to what you're saying in a general sense so far about the Islamic understanding and conception of the world and the human being. It also reminded me of the hadith of Prophet where the rocks were doing tasbih, and then Prophet basically said, this is what the rocks are doing, and the Sahaba around him. So I think from all those, we can read it as on a surface level, obviously, which is amazing as it is, but then the deeper layers of the properties of the I think we're talking about the plants that were in the Prophet ﷺ, Islam's example, with the rocks. All these elements are within us as well, and that manifest in our personality.
That's right.
And that connects to what you're saying about having a holistic understanding of the world and the universe, how it is interconnected, the world, and then out here it's inside us as well.
Yeah.
So aspects about water, aspects about earth from the rocks, within us as well. Exactly. And so we need to also try to work towards understanding what that even means, what that is, and how that plays out. And that's, I guess, an aspect of hikmah medicine as well. That will facilitate our worship as well, because we'll be more grateful to Allah because of all these wondrous ways of how He created the universe.
Yes.
That we don't, I guess, day-to-day life, we don't really realize. So just wanted to connect that.
No, exactly. Well, Thank you. Exactly. So that's one of the practical ways that we begin to translate this knowledge now, is we start to identify that whatever we're looking at on the horizons, Allah Ta'ala says, we will show them our signs on the horizons and within themselves until it is manifest, is clear that He is the truth. And so there's a connection between the horizons, the outer world, the outer universe, وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, and within their own self, within their own nafs. Right? So in that we start to begin to understand that, okay, so in the world there's these 4 elements. We'll use that. There's in Chinese medicine it's 5 elements. In the Ayurvedic systems it's 3 doshas. There's different languages. The way I think of it is different madhabs. In fiqh we have Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbali. In medicine we have 3, 4, 5 element systems. Right? They're all coherent. They all have gifts. Subhanallah. But let's say the Hakim tradition is that which has 4 elements. You have fire, water, earth, and air. And the 4 elements link with the 4 seasons. Spring, summer, fall, winter. We're now in the summer. We're now in the season of fire. Hot and dry principle. And there's 4 humors, which are 4 like tissue states in the body. You have blood, bile, black bile, and phlegm. So this is now the time of bile, which is liver. This is the organ of the liver, and bile. And this is of course what we call the safrawi, or the choleric temperament, the mizaj of the choleric. So now if you are a choleric person in the summer now, what happens to you? If you are a fire person in a season of fire,
you'll probably be more energetic because you're becoming more of your excess of your heat.
Yes, and possibly even going into imbalance. And so part of individualizing support for someone like that would be to help them understand themselves. Like, who are you? Know thyself, the old dictum of the Greeks, know thyself. And we have that kind of hikmah as well amongst the ulama. Man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbah. Whoever knows themselves knows their Lord. Ajib. So this is about getting to know myself for health and vitality. This is about getting to know myself so that I can know Allah Ta'ala. I mean, this is deep. The knowledge of the self is very deep. And the Hakims are interested in that. And in fact, they cannot do their work unless they come to know you in some way. They have to be able to individualize it. That's what makes it holistic, right? It's not using the natural things that makes it holistic. It's the individualizing of the actual temperament and individualizing the prescription to the actual needs of the case that makes it holistic. You see? So, understanding whether you are a summer, autumn, winter, or spring person is essential. Knowing the family kind of, tendencies that we have. We all have families that have certain types of tendencies. We think now in the language of genetics, but it's not like that was a new concept, in the 1960s when Francis and Crick found DNA in the helix and all of that. That wasn't a new concept at the time. They gave it a chemical, physical kind of, form, but the idea of transmission of familial traits through lineage is something that we've known for a long time. So that becomes an important thing, yeah. But also you can think of it in terms of the fitrah. And this isn't really, I'll share about this, maybe we can open it up for discussion, inshaAllah ta'ala. But, we talk about the fitrah in Islamic medicine. What is the fitrah? Who could describe the fitrah? It's a difficult word to translate, actually. It's actually not, I haven't been able to find like one nice word, clean word that captures it. Anybody want to take a jab at it?
It's very difficult.
Yeah. The fitrah, so we can say something like...
your inner self.
Yeah, inner self. I like to use like...
Original self.
Original self, I like that. So I've heard teachers of mine say the principal nature that you were born in. كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ. Every child, the Prophet ﷺ said, every child is born in fitrah. And then the Jewish families make the children Jewish, and the Christians make their children Christian, and the Magian, the fire worshippers, Magian. And we could say the Muslim, right? We can say that. And ideally, we're, as Muslims, followers and practitioners of Deenul Fitrah. This is the deen of the fitrah. This is the deen, the way of life that Allah Ta'ala has given mankind to preserve and cultivate the fitrah, which is our principal nature. Other adyan, they're not Deenul Fitrah. They've lost their status as Deenul Fitrah. Maybe at the time when they were revealed, the respective prophets, and they were intact, they were Deenul Fitrah. But now Islam is Deenul Fitrah, right? And so what happened is that we get enculturated naturally, right? We socialize into families. We're talking about Australian identity, and what it means to be Australian, and what it means for us to be here in the West, and what's the task. for us moving forward for the next 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. So what does that look like in Australia? Right? We want to be able to envision this type of thing because we understand socialization. So there's a socialization that happens in the early childhood experience, right? In the family home, very early. And we know now even in utero that process can start. In utero, meaning in the womb. That we begin to actually we have a principial nature, but then now because of the different types of influences around us, we're hearing our family, there's certain language, there's certain tones, there's certain emotions, there's certain foods that we're eating. All these are now influences that are affecting even the fetus in the womb of the mother. But especially after they're delivered and they're in the world physically and now responding, even intuitively, the baby doesn't rationalize anything, but it's responding to it spontaneously, intuitively, from the first moments of life. And developing a sense of self as well as a sense of a story almost of what the world is like and how I am to relate to the world. What's my relationship to the world? We learn these things very early. Yeah? And in healthy families, the fitrah is maintained, more or less. We all lose it a little bit because we have this formation of what we call the nafs. And the nafs is like, the way I like to think about it is a strategy of sorts. The people of ihsan, of tazkiyah and tarbiyah talk about the nafs and the qalb being almost like the two main parts of you. You have the true self, which is the qalb, and then you have, in some part, the false self. The false self, right? The acquired self, the ego self, right? The image, the projection, and that's nafs. And Allah Ta'ala, this is also kind of my hypothesizing and stuff like that, but I believe that there's some sort of formation of the nafs that happens very early in life as a result of these enculturating influences, that we lose access to the fitrah very early, and then we form this nafs as like a mask. And the whole point of our lives is basically to cultivate this nafs and release kind of the defense mechanism, the strategy that it's basically tied to, that was serving us early in life.
I would say, just to add to that, maybe that's why we have to do seclusion every now and then.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And temperamentally, you will know like who probably needs that more than others at times, like depending on, someone's a bit more extroverted or introverted of their natures, so it comes back to the self. Knowing thyself, yeah,
exactly. I think there's something fitri about khalwa. The Prophet ﷺ went into khalwa. Before receiving nubuwwah, his time in Ghar Hira, and we know about all that. And I think in general now, I think it's important for us to, because we're always connected to the dunya in ways that is very anti-fitrah.
Yep.
Right? In the sense that, like, when you would come home, maybe, the world, you close the door behind you, and you were just with your family, you're with your loved ones, and none of the world could reach you inside. Even someone knocked, the sunnah is to knock on the door 3 times. If the person doesn't answer, you walk away. But here it's like we're constantly engaged. It's beyond the door, It's in the air. The dunya is in the cloud. Like, you must remember, 20 years ago when the internet was a place you would go to for example, in my father's study, he had a computer and you had the 56K line, the connection, and you'd go to the internet and you'd go on Yahoo, you go on MSN, and then you disconnect and go back to normal life. Now it's all together. There's no separation between that. So khalwa becomes essential.
It's kind of like this, reminded me of the dua.
Exactly.
And I've never understood.
Can you translate that?
Yeah, Allah, do not make this dunya bigger than what I am.
Yeah.
More important than to myself.
Yes.
And it is almost like that if we are making the dunya bigger, as in we are connected to the dunya bigger, we are forgetting ourselves, which is more important, and hence mentioned in the dua.
Yes.
Akbaru hammina, so as mentioning ourselves.
Our greatest concern, almost. Making it our main concern. Ya Allah, don't make dunya my main concern. I want to be concerned with you and akhirah and service of the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's my main concern. I don't want to be concerned with dunya. Yes, of course.
Thank you very much, first of all. Very kind of you spending time talking about this. I just wanted to learn more about understanding of naturopathy treatments. So far, it gave me the perception of that talk, listening to you, and it's very much mind. It's more about psychology. It's more about that. When we all label Western medicine, I don't call them Western medicine. They are universal. Knowledge can come from anywhere, and they are evidence-based. That's what they are. I'm a researcher. I look at the evidence. As if there's no evidence, that doesn't hold to me.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, of course, that benefit of the naturopathy, you have the herbal medicine which goes with that as well. So it's a combination of both. It's a psychological well-being as well, and then through herbs and various these plant-based medicine. Is that's what it is? That is the kind of combination of both? Is it, or is the focus is only on the counseling side, or sort of psychological well-being based only?
Good. Before I answer the question, I think it's a really good way to have this free-flowing discussion.
Yes.
Where obviously yourself with your background, I think you said chemistry, is it?
No, I'm electrical engineer. And,
electrical engineer, but obviously you're coming from more evidence-based outlook and wanting to understand, I guess.
My family is full of doctors.
Yeah.
So that what and if I'm going to tell them and I'm listening to naturopath.
Yes.
So what it's going to
Yeah, so I mean that's really good because that's obviously the prevailing outlook of, I guess, quote unquote Tibb or Islamic medicine. There's that kind of a bit of skepticism.
Of course.
So I think this is a good way to kind of in a free manner have those questions addressed. You can bring your sort of points, and if you feel like you disagree, it's good to just have that discussion. No, I'm saying it's good.
This is a good conversation.
If I could add what like Bala has asked a question to add that in a practical aspect, as a common man, we all, what is the concept of being healthy and what is the approach? Because if you talk to different people, they will tell you different things. That's when you are healthy. Okay. Second part is when you have any kind of problem and you approach a doctor, they will give you some kind of advice. And then the other part, what you do, you try to talk to your friends, colleagues, or maybe you try to do the research on internet or somewhere. You are lost.
Yes.
So what would be an approach to in this situation? How in terms of the naturopath or in terms of the practical part?
So
thank you.
We'll
come back.
Then maybe we'll come back to your question and get that addressed. So more about evidence-based, that kind of approach.
So I come from a background of physicians as well. My father's a cardiologist, and my grandfather was a physician in Syria. And I grew up in a very weird bubble in Chicago.
Just maybe just explain to the brother, naturopath in Australia is different to naturopath in America.
That's true.
So
I'll describe that as well.
That would be interesting to know.
Yeah, that's good to also qualify as well. We're quite different. I grew up in Chicago in a community of physicians. All my friends were the sons of physicians. All my friends, most of them became physicians. So I grew up in a very weird bubble. So I understand the sentiment, and I've had this conversation with many types of people.
Someone we know.
Yeah,
so close to your family as well.
It's someone in my family.
Dr. Gilan,
yeah. So this is a good question. I'm glad you brought it up. Number two, I'm also very skeptical. My nature is also very skeptical. And actually what brought me into this medicine itself was skepticism, but of the other side, right? It wasn't a skepticism of the natural, of the Islamic. I have that too, obviously. We're not accepting everything wholesale, but I also am very skeptical. So I have that, that perspective that I'm coming from as well. It's not a romantic notion. It's a skeptical notion of the philosophical and the psychological, like you mentioned. But also, I would say the medical. So maybe we can talk more about medical and the physical, right? And evidence, because this is very important too. This is where science now becomes under scrutiny itself. Because in Western medicine, in Western civilization now, science is the harbinger. Not the harbinger, it is the, what's the word?
Hegemon.
I mean, it's hegemonic, yeah, it's hegemonic, but it's the furqan, it's the criterion. It's the criterion, like, to the point where you'll have Muslim professionals that will hear something in Quran or Sunnah, and they'll say, but science says this, you see? Now that's a colonized frame. Like that's something that is a product of a misalignment, Science in its best place, in its most useful place really, is a method of inquiry. It's not a belief system. It's not ideology. If science becomes ideology, it becomes scientism. It becomes an ism, which is ideology based, right? It becomes a construct. It becomes a belief. I believe in science. What do you mean you believe? Like, is there shahada? Is there salahs? Like you have rituals? And it becomes like that, though. Isn't it like when? And I'm sorry, I don't want to go into this topic at all. But for example, when COVID came, and there was a lot of ikhtilaf amongst, people on our side of the fence. It's like there is so much that we can do, but every time I want to share something of homeopathy, acupuncture, herbs, even just telling people, just try not to be so afraid, because the fear impacts your immune system, which makes you more susceptible. So this media scaring you is actually disserving the community, scientifically. If you have to hear that word, scientifically, it's ruining the integrity of the immune system. It's compromising you. But we would get shadow banned and we get turned down because the white coats, the sheikhs in the white coats said this is what science said. 6 feet apart. That was science, right? That was science that 6 feet apart. Here, 2 meters, I guess, would be 2 meters apart. Was that what they said?
1.5 meters.
Oh, 1.5. So we had 6
in
feet.
Victoria, not in Adelaide. So next state it was okay.
Yeah, right. But science, right? Because science, it's something that you find young kids in university will say, why is that? Why do you say that? Why do you believe that? And they'll simply say, because science. See? So that it becomes the furqan for people. It becomes the criterion, and that becomes a veil. Now, in terms of, the physical study of what works in the body. For example, I'll tell you, like, I'm a homeopath. Many rational, empirical, quote-unquote, materialist of the scientists will say it is impossible for homeopathy to work or acupuncture needles to work. Impossible. There's no conception of anything beyond what is chemically observable as a mechanism of action, the MOA. Right? If I cannot
because science is taking into, like, as the data is taking in whatever you can see or touch as observable.
The 5 senses become the only thing that are real.
Like, you can't test happiness. Like, what is happiness? Under a microscope, it means they just see it as dopamines, which is a very physical thing. But happiness is more than just things that are moving,
or love.
So, like, what does that mean? So, like, obviously there's its limitations that people have to understand, that science has limitations.
Yes.
It's a very useful tool, but that's all it is, a tool. Amongst many other tools you use. I just wanted to...
Yes, thank you.
Chef, I think scientifically you can collect evidence that homeopathy and needles work, by conducting thousands of experiments and correcting the data, but you cannot present a theory, but you can still observe the results. It is observable. It is doable.
So you can inductively go back. So there's principles in homeopathic philosophy. There's principles, and they've been put to test and proved, right? But not the proving of what we call now the gold standard in science, which is the RCT, the randomized controlled trial. For them, the RCT, if you have that, I don't care, so you have RCTs now that are being developed by drug companies.
RCT should work without presenting a theory. They cannot present a theory as to why needles would work, but if you conduct a RCT, they should be able to observe that it works.
It should be able to. So here, RCTs are a double-edged sword, right? Because there's some sort of notion that I need to be able to do the trial and to find the mechanism of action of that of the one specific thing that I can then generalize. Okay?
That generalization cannot occur, maybe. But
it cannot. It's impossible in holistic medicine. That's the whole point I was saying earlier, right? You have to individualize.
But
so, for example, if you have 10 people with anxiety, or you have 10 people with arthritis, it is normative. It is expected for someone like myself and brother Hamad, God bless you, that they would walk out from our clinics with a different prescription. You see? But it may be that one person has anxiety, another person has reflux, another person has a skin issue. It just happens that they would walk in one after the other and they walk out with a similar homeopathic remedy. How do you make sense of that? You cannot, from a scientific reductionistic perspective, because they want to take a particular and expand it to a universal. Right? Where we do the opposite.
So just to add as well, like as you're talking about anxiety, like there's different reasons as to why people experience anxiety, like many different reasons. So back to what you were saying about Islamic medicine, it's about addressing the root cause.
Absolutely.
Whereas Western medicine is just seeing what am I observing, like anxiety, and that's it, as if it's like one or the same in that. I mean, there's different kinds of anxiety from the Western perspective.
It's basically
it's just whatever is observable, but we know Islamically there's something a lot more deeper happening. Like we were talking about weather, this and that. So.
Let me add to what brother has said. It's actually with the RCT. The problem is that you are put into a set of rules. You have to fit in those. So let's say somebody comes in, and I'm gonna give the example which everybody has experienced: low back pain. It's one of the most common going around, somebody who has that. Yet, same person can have lower back pain if they are sitting, and some of them will tell you that when they stand up it gets a little bit better. When they're sitting it's worse. Some people will tell you when they are standing up it's worse, and when they're sitting down it's not. So the difference between the two, they both are complaining with the lower back pain. So it's just I'm making it very, very narrow.
Deeper, so much deeper.
So it's just that if somebody is sitting down and there is no pain, and when they stand up there is pain, that means the issue is lower down. When they are sitting down and there's pain, and standing up gets lesser, that means that more weight is taken by the legs, so it's up. So RCT will not differentiate between the two because it's just low back pain.
No, I think you can widen this.
Sorry, we'll just have to because the food is getting a little cold. We'll probably we'll continue the questions. We'll get some food. Everyone sit down. We'll probably have a minute or two to reflect on.
Warm up again, please.
Okay,
because we actually went through this RCT just recently to actually prove how the entire thing is not really suitable because that's the pharmaceutical standards, which is not suitable for the holistic medicine at all in any way. So that's the new thing actually developed in RMIT.
But the question to
we'll
me
probably
rises,
put a pause. We'll put a pause, and then.
But again, my question rises that any treatment or any strategy which you set up, you got to prove it. It works.
Oh yes. So here's what I would
there has
offer.
to be a process. It has to be repeatable. It has to be repeatable. So I'm not against it, brother Donner. I want to hear that.
So here's it has to be repeatable in the sense that it works for
that person
in general, right? In general. But you can't make it that, okay, it works for this person, so it must work for everybody. That framing is a very reductionistic
I absolutely
framing.
agree
Come
with
on,
you.
yeah, that's
I
perfect.
absolutely agree with
So as long as we agreed there, like that's really, like from an example, from a homeopathic perspective, there's constitutions. You have constitutional prescribing. I'm sure the same in acupuncture as well, in Chinese medicine.
The osteopathic, because I just had Christian Fossum, who used to be the American Osteopathic Association president. And we had a very interesting conversation because he's into the, he was trying to create something that is reproducible. And at the end of the day, this is what happens, because you have the peripheral system, and this is, again, nervous system, I'm just giving an example. You have peripheral system, you have the spinal cord, that's a secondary system, so you got the first order neuron, second order neuron, third order neuron. You can have inflammation in the third order neuron, which will give you peripheral symptoms.
Yeah.
You can have the first order neuron reaching all the way to the third order neuron. And you can have the second neuron giving both ways. How do you put them into one group? You can't.
Yes.
Very interesting.
So one thing of a solution, honestly, that I think of is
It is
instead of
science, but
doing
you
RCTs, where we're just trying to have,
You can't
we're
have
comparing one
RCT.
thing versus a drug for a population. We're testing one drug versus placebo for a big population. Let's take 2 groups over 10 years.
वो नहीं accept करते हैं.
Say, okay, this group is committed to getting conventional care for 10 years. And then this group is committed to getting naturopathic, hikmah, whatever, care for 10 years. What are the health outcomes like in those groups over 10 years? See, that kind of thing was way more interesting. So that lets everybody within their own zone apply their own medicine fully. You see? But with RCTs, holistic medicine is at a disadvantage because it can't express, it can't act on its principles and its code of practice fully, because it has to abide by this rigid structure of the RCT trial. So it loses itself. It can't, it's not, That's the main thing, God bless you. God bless you. Your name was Akbal, yeah?
Observation
Nice to meet you.
Good answer.